Let's go to Javier Farje. He's a journalist and historian specializing in Latin American affairs, joins us from London. So the latest word, Javier, that we're hearing here, according to US media, and we do have to emphasize this is not an official statement so far from Donald Trump, but this is according to US media saying that President Trump ordered strikes on sites inside Venezuela. If this is indeed the situation that we're looking at, do we have any idea of what the goal is of this apparent US military operation, again, according to US media reports?
When I was checking the Venezuelan media and I was talking to people in Caracas, the bombing has happened in three crucial parts of Caracas. Fuerte Tiuna, which is the seat of the Ministry of Defense, Cuartel de la Montaña, which is where Hugo Chavez is buried, and La Carlota. Now, it is very worrying because all these installations are within an urban area of Caracas. Caracas, I know Caracas very well. It's a very cramped city. In fact, I remember that I used to be able to see Fuerte Tiuna from my hotel room when I was there last time. So it is very, very cramped. There's a lot of civilian housing going on there, but he has targeted apparently three crucial elements of the military in Caracas. The other thing as well, we mustn't forget something which is very important. Recently, he reinforced military installations in Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is around 11 kilometers away from the Venezuelan coast and around 300 kilometers from Caracas. So maybe they would have used that facility to be able to bomb Caracas. And also, they are reporting bombings in urban areas like El Junquito, El Matillo, El Marqués, Los Ruices. This may not sound too very sort of important for the listeners here, but the important element is that these are urban areas. There are civilians who have been running away scared. So obviously there could be two reasons for this. One, to intimidate Maduro and force him to negotiate. Don't forget that this is happening a couple of days after President Maduro said that he would actually be prepared to negotiate with Caracas. Or could be the prelude of an invasion. We don't know that. As your correspondent said, an invasion of Venezuela can only be approved by Congress. Many members of the Republican Party are uneasy about this possibility. They're accusing Trump of breaking the Constitution. So we remains to be seen whether this is going to be the case and what the reaction in the White House is. But what is clear is that they have been bombing military objectives. I know there's three military installations, and they are crucial for the defense of Caracas.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about places like Fuerte Tiuna and La Carlota. A strike on those sorts of bases, what would that do? How much of a setback would it cause to the Venezuelan military forces? Does that target primarily their ability to move on the land, their air defense system? Where does that leave the Venezuelan military?
That's a good question. I think it's more intimidation than anything else. Venezuela is a federal republic that has very similar installations in different states of Venezuela. Different states which are they have a plan. They have a plan which have been going on. They have been preparing for this invasion for years, but they have different areas of defense in different states of Venezuela. So this wouldn't destroy the capacity of the Venezuelan army to repel an invasion, but it would intimidate them, especially if we think that Fuerte Tiuna is the seat of the Ministry of Defense. So bombing this installation in itself does not constitute weakening of the military structure in Venezuela, but it is intimidating in terms of the capacity the United States has to be able to bomb these objectives. So no, I mean they will have they have a very structured defense program. I saw the program, I saw the graphic when I visited military headquarters in 2017. And they've been preparing for this for a long, long time. So once this happens, once this bombings happen in Caracas, which is, again, I believe is the issue is to intimidate Maduro, then they will put in place all the defense mechanisms that they have in different states of Venezuela. So no, it will not weaken the capacity of Venezuela to defend itself. I mean, these are small, actually, barracks. They are not really big. They are not really. They are really very symbolic in many ways. Cuartel de la Montaña, for example, where Hugo Chavez is bombed. It's not a military installation anymore. It used to be, but it's not anymore. It's just a place where the mausoleum for Hugo Chavez is. So obviously, the whole idea is to undermine the morality of the Venezuelan army and the Venezuelan government. It remains to be seen whether that's going to work.
And I'm distilling what you're saying. And Javier, you are, of course, also not only a specialist in Latin American affairs, but also a historian. When we look at historical parallels, right, when the US, before it invaded Iraq, there was a long period of build-up of ground forces. The opening shots focused initially on taking out, focused on the Iraqi air defense systems. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing, is it the lack of those sorts of parallels which is prompting you to make the sort of comments that this looks more symbolic to you rather than the beginning of something much greater in terms of a land invasion?
Yeah. For the moment, yes. For the moment, yes. Venezuela, Caracas can be invaded by the sea. And maybe they can use all the military equipment and ship and all that they have in the Caribbean. Also, they can use the facilities in Trinidad and Tobago to invade Caracas. I'm telling you, it's 300 kilometers from Caracas, 11 kilometers from the actual coast, the northern coast of Venezuela. Now, the thing is that they will need to bomb military installations in different states of Venezuela to be able to reduce the capacity of the Venezuelan army to defend itself. Bombing these installations in Caracas does not constitute, in military terms, a destruction of the capacity that Venezuela has to defend itself. Because, as I said to you, these installations are very small. Now, the parallels, you could establish the parallels in terms of bombing the city first and then invading later. But the invasion of Venezuela would be more difficult because of the different structures of defense that they have installed in the coast of
hang on,
Venezuela.
Javier, because you mentioned an important point. We'll come to what you're talking about now in a moment. But I want to go, how will the Maduro government deal with that? Are there any indication that Maduro would even contemplate stepping down and handing over?
Well, so far, no, because the last time we had an interview with President Maduro to Ramonet, the French journalist, a couple of days ago, where he said that he wouldn't step down, but he would be prepared to negotiate not only the drug issue, but also oil. Offer concessions to the United States in terms of exploiting oil, the way that Chevron, the American company, has. They have 25%, they exploit and explore 25% of Venezuelans' oil. So in that respect, he offered that. It is no coincidence that 2 days after he made this offer, they bombed Venezuela. Now, it's important to notice that not long ago, not a few minutes ago, President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, has asked for an urgent meeting of the United Nations and the Organization of American States to discuss this situation. A couple of days ago, he reported a bomb that fell in one part of Colombia, and he thought it was a prelude of attacks in Venezuela. He was obviously right in this respect. Now, whether the OAS and the UN will meet to discuss this issue, that remains to be seen. In relation to what Maduro said that he will mobilize the Command of Integral Defense, Comando de Defensa Integral. This is a structure of defense of Venezuela, which includes many states, crucial states in Venezuela, including Estado Lara, for example. I visited Estado Lara 7 years ago. I visited barracks 7 years ago, and they have a well-placed structure of defense for the different parts, the vulnerable part of the country. Don't forget, yes, the bombings in Caracas is serious, but it's not Caracas is not the front line of the defense of Venezuela. There are different states in Venezuela which have a crucial role to play in any kind of defense. Now, Mr. Maduro has not mobilized the volunteers which have been training. They have been training for the last year. He hasn't. We don't know whether he's going to mobilize or has mobilized the different defense structures in Venezuela, but we expect that to happen. Again,
Javier, just to clarify, we heard a statement from the Venezuelan authorities saying they're calling for the activation of mobilization plans. So that might be... Right. I want to go to...
That means that... Yeah.
Which the Colombian president is calling for?
Well, we are supposed to do that, The problem for the Venezuelan government is that most countries these days, important countries in Latin America, I'm not saying that they are not important, but some of them in terms of the economy and their presence in the region are right-wing governments. Milei in Argentina, for example, Noboa in Ecuador, they will be very happy to accept an invasion of Venezuela. Milei would applaud it because he's a staunch ally of Trump. Now, in that respect, the OAS may not come up with a resolution that condemns explicitly this invasion. The other thing that I need to inform you is that I have just read that the armed forces have been mobilized. The armed forces have been mobilized in the crucial regions of the Command of Integral Defense: Apure in southwest, southeast, Cojedes in the center, the capital, Carabobo center, north, Guarico center, and Barinas west. That means that now there's a full mobilization of the Bolivarian National Air Forces, armed forces in Venezuela itself. Now the OAS, it's been happening for the last few years. The OAS never agrees because you have different governments with different interests. There will be governments who will gladly accept an invasion of Venezuela. As I said, Milei, for example, will be probably at the helm of that. However, Brazil, Lula da Silva and Gustavo Petro from Colombia will be against that. So I wouldn't expect a resolution condemning the invasion and some kind of resolution that will probably be a very sort of like a wishy-washy one that would say, look, let's talk about this. Now, the other important thing about it is that mentioned in China, for example, Russia a couple of days ago asked the U.S. government to allow a tanker to sail along the waters of the Caribbean Sea. Of course, the government in the U.S. has not responded to that. So it's very important, the crucial alliance that Venezuela has with Russia and China. Now, how much can they do to stop the invasion? Very little, because they won't get involved in any kind of military conflict with the United States. But they could actually put pressure in the Security Council to stop this. Now, as your colleague said, the bombing has stopped. It looks to me, again, it's early days. We don't really know what is the case. The objective will be to intimidate Maduro and say, okay, this is what we can do, President Maduro. The ball is in your court, especially after Maduro offered 2 days ago to negotiate the drug traffic, which is not a big problem for Venezuela anyway, and especially oil. It would be naive to believe that oil has nothing to do with what's happening in Venezuela at the moment.
I'll listen down a bit. Javier, what is the calculation that Nicolas Maduro needs to make at this point, if, of course, this latest round of strikes end at where we are right now with, as Sisi saying, they seem to have calmed down for now?
Well, first of all, the mobilization in 23 states, I'm just reading the latest report from the Ministry of Defense, has happened. That means that the army is ready for that. It's very important to realize something. The armed forces in Venezuela are part of the political project of then Hugo Chavez, now Maduro. It's the most politicized armed forces in Latin America. What I'm trying to say here is that it's very unlikely, although you never know with the armed forces in Venezuela, that then the armed forces will kick him out or sell him to the United States or let him or force him to resign, because the armed forces have a lot of interest that they will lose if Maduro falls. As I said to you, Venezuela is very politicized army, armed forces. So far, for the time being, Maduro is safe where he is now. Second, the important issue here about Maduro is who is going to help him in Latin America. You were talking about mediations before. President Lula da Silva of Brazil, who does not recognize Maduro's government, it's important to say that even though they are both left-wing, offered to mediate some time ago, and Trump said no. The other element is that Colombia, whatever happens in Venezuela affects Colombia. Colombia has a 2,200 kilometer border with Venezuela. So everything that happens in Venezuela affects Colombia. Now, President Petro, who we have heard, has called for the UN and the OAS to meet. He doesn't recognize President Maduro, but he says, look, I might not like him, I might not recognize him, but you cannot invade a sovereign country. He would be against the invasion of a sovereign country. So Maduro has two options. One, to reinforce the loyalty that the armed forces has to the whole process, because he will say, look, this is not about me, this is about the Bolivarian revolution, and you cannot betray by giving me over. So the armed forces so far are still well behind Maduro. That's good for him because it's crucial for Maduro to survive, but also it's crucial for him to have two potential allies, even though if they don't like him, Brazil and Colombia, to fight in the international arena, apart from Russia and China. So Maduro, so far, has some options there, but whether he's going to decide by himself to give up in order to make things possible for a transition, that remains to be seen. Everything that we're going now at the moment is a speculation. There's nothing is actually can be confirmed. But what is clear is the United States campaign in Caracas is intimidating, but it doesn't destroy the capacity of Venezuela to defend itself against any kind of foreign attacks.
Javier, as we talk about the goal here, we should recall that the United States President Donald Trump has spoken about Venezuelan oil as our oil.
Yes. I mean, they've always considered the oil, the nationalization of the Venezuelan oil was unwelcome by the United States. However, it's important to notice that Chevron, the American company, they exploit 25% of the oil in Venezuela. And the tankers have been sailing forward and backwards between Venezuela and the United States without being disturbed. So what's going to happen in that particular case? Many people accuse the government in Venezuela of giving Chevron too many concessions, but this is crucial in terms of what role oil will play in this situation. The other thing is important, and I'm sorry to divert a bit from your question, is it's important to know what the opposition in Venezuela is going to do, how they are going to react to this. The opposition in Venezuela is divided between those who would accept an invasion, including, ironically, the Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Corina Machado, who didn't rule out a support for an invasion, and the other sector of the opposition, led by Enrique Capriles, the former presidential candidate, who would oppose totally the invasion of Venezuela. That's extremely important. We haven't heard from the opposition yet. Of course, it's early days. It's very early day, but we don't know what the opposition is going to say in relation to this. But oil is important. It would be naive to believe oil has nothing to do with it. Now, when there was a sort of criticism within Venezuela when President Maduro, a couple of days ago, in an interview that gave to journalist Ramonet, he offered concessions of oil to the United States. Obviously, for the President Maduro, he doesn't have much of a choice if that is the issue that is crucial here in this particular situation. So oil is important. Whether this bombing is a plan to intimidate and push Maduro towards a hard negotiation in relation to oil, we don't know that. Again, it is very, very early days, and this is speculation, but oil definitely has a role to play in this situation at the moment, and it's been like that for many, many years.
Well, Javier Farje is a journalist and historian specializing in Latin American affairs. He can join us once again from London. So with this attack that we've seen now, this takes the confrontation, this takes the standoff between the US and Venezuela to a new level. Is a deal still possible that keeps Maduro in power?
Yes, for as long as there's no further attacks in Venezuela. We mustn't forget, and it's been mentioned in this report several times, the attacks in Caracas are more symbolic than damaging for the defense structure of Venezuela. So in that respect, maybe they would force Maduro to negotiate, and he would have to consult with the armed forces because they are his main backers in Venezuela, the armed forces, whether that is the best way to avoid a direct confrontation with the United States. Now, so far, the armed forces are still behind President Maduro. They have activated the internal defense structure in 23 states in Venezuela. That means that so far, they are still defending the government. It will depend very much as well of how much is Maduro willing to leave power to avoid the conflict. This is the first direct attack of the United States in Venezuelan territory and the capital. You were talking earlier about the attack on the Cuartel de la Montaña, where Hugo Chavez is buried. It's very symbolic that, because that's the barracks where in 1992 Hugo Chavez tried to set up a military coup against the government of Carlos Andrés Pérez. So it's a very symbolic, it's a shrine, and attacking it, they're not attacking a military objective because there's no military activities in that barrack. It's a symbolic, it's a mausoleum, it's a shrine for the followers of President Chavez. So whether these attacks intend to force Maduro to negotiate, it remains to be seen. Now, we will know only if there are further attacks in other states in Venezuela. I mean, really concrete attacks in states where there's this structure of defense, which means that they will undermine the capacity of Venezuela to defend its own sovereignty. So it remains to be seen. The opposition has just said, in exile, has just said that they will not make any statements until they confirm that the attack was from the United States, which is a bit strange because it's very clear that the attack was from the United States. The official spokespeople of Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo González Urrutia, the presidential candidate of the opposition in last year's election, who are in exile, they both said that they will not say anything. I would imagine their plan is to try to organize a joint statement because the opposition is very divided in relation to what they really want. Many people in the opposition do not want an invasion, especially including prominent members of the opposition like Enrique Capriles, who was a presidential candidate twice for the opposition, and other members of the opposition, the most moderate members of the opposition. So it depends very much on how much they're going to agree for a joint statement among the 50-odd groups that compose the opposition in Venezuela. So there are many things that we don't know yet. We don't know whether they are going to try to force Maduro to negotiate. We don't know whether they are going to actually go for him. So far, it doesn't look like it's been the case. As your colleague said in Caracas, the bombings have stopped, and they could have continued if they wanted to. So there's a difference between this and Iraq, for example. So everything is on the air. President Maduro may offer to leave. There's some speculation that the conversation he had with Trump in November was related to Maduro offering to step down if there is a safe passage to him and his family. We don't know whether that's the case, but many media organizations have been speculating that was the content of the conversation. Trump might have not agreed with that, and of course, now we have this bombing of Caracas. So everything is on the air. Everything is speculation. We don't really know what the next step is going to be in relation to Venezuela and the United States and how the international community is going to react. Now, in relation to the Organization of American States, unfortunately for Maduro, he doesn't have many allies because, as it has been mentioned before in this report, there are many right-wing presidents who will be very happy, I beg your pardon, to support an invasion. It's crucial as well here, the opposition. I mean, it's quite strange that the opposition has not issued a statement. They prefer to confirm, they said, that this bombing was by the United States, which is strange because everybody knows the United States carried out this bombing.
Javier, the only statement we've heard, or I read from the opposition, was saying that the opposition has no comment or statement on it. That seems to be the extent of all they're saying.
Yeah. And until they confirm, let me translate it. In this moment, there's no official statement about the events reported in Venezuela. It's a very vague statement. It's strange because the opposition would be one of the first organizations to say something about this, but we'll have to wait and see whether they want to negotiate among themselves, whether they can come up with a joint statement about this bombing of Caracas.
And this is where we're at. The US President, Donald Trump, has released a statement on Truth Social, you can see it there, saying that he's confirmed the US has carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela. That explains what we've been reporting the last few hours, and as you can see in the box above me, of these explosions in Venezuela. But then, very President Nicolas Maduro and his wife have been captured and flown out of the country. He goes on to say that the operation was done in conjunction with US law enforcement and says there'll be a news conference later today at 11 a.m. Now, all of this happening after what we've been reporting of explosions happening in Caracas, also in a few other areas, but explosions at a military airbase, at a military fortification and base for Fortuna, where the Ministry of Defense is headquartered, attacks and strikes on the mausoleum of Hugo Chavez, the late leader of Venezuela, attacks apparently on the residence of the defense minister, explosions reported too at the international airport in Caracas. So all of that was building up. Then this report, this statement by the US president, that the Venezuelan president is no longer in Venezuela. American forces have taken him. Let's go to Javier Farje. Javier, I guess the question now is there somebody with the status that can fill the void and command the respect and the following of the security forces at this point within Venezuela?
Well, his staunch allies within the armed forces were Vladimir Padrino and Diosdado Cabello. They are in charge of the armed forces. It remains to be seen whether the
Do
armed
we
forces
know
will
what
be
their
prepared.
status is? Do we know whether they were targeted?
We don't know.
too?
We don't know. I mean, all we can say is that now, after you have given us this surprising statement by Donald Trump, don't forget that Donald Trump announced that they were going to start CIA operations within the territory of Venezuela. We don't know whether this the removal of Maduro has been the result of those operations. It will be interesting to know that. We have to wait until his press conference to decide whether that was the case. The problem is that Maduro has always represented he's been the heir of Hugo Chavez. If Hugo Chavez was in power at the moment, it wouldn't have been an invasion. So it depends to be seen whether they are going to have to get together and find a leader or find somebody who might replace Nicolas Maduro. Now, we don't know whether regime change is going to be the next step by President Trump. Maybe they will install Edmundo Gonzalez, who lost the election of July last year. Whether they are going to negotiate with the opposition, a transition government, or they are going to negotiate with the armed forces and the remains of the Maduro government, a transition to a new situation, a new democratic process in Venezuela. So everything is up to speculation. If Maduro has been removed, the government in Venezuela will be headless, totally headless, because he's been the person who's been the commander-in-chief, if you like, of the so-called Bolivarian revolution. Without him, they will be a bit headless and will have to decide who's going to take over. We don't know whether, if he's being arrested, he's been taken out of the country, who remains in charge? The vice president, the defense minister, I mean, the president of the National Assembly, for example. We don't really know what the situation is at the moment. The only person who has confirmed that Maduro has been removed is Trump himself. All the media organizations are not really reporting that yet. So we don't really know. It's very difficult at this stage to negotiate an opinion or a position in relation to what's happening in Venezuela. Because Maduro has been the main protagonist of all this saga. As president, as a so-called, and there's no proof that that's the case, of a head of some kind of drug dealing gang, which is a ridiculous accusation, because everybody knows that he's not. Now Maduro out of power, whether the others will negotiate a transition to a different government, maybe a transition between this government and a new election or something like that, or the opposition leaders will be put in place in replacing Maduro. We mustn't forget as well that whoever is in charge, let's assume for the moment that the opposition will get away with having a leader in charge. The armed forces, many people in the armed forces are still loyal to the Chavez project. So whoever runs the government in Venezuela from the opposition will have to deal with that fact.
Javier,
that fact
according to the Constitution, it should be the vice president, right? Delcy Rodriguez.
Yes. Yeah, Delcy Rodriguez. Delcy Rodriguez is very popular. She has a different post in the government in Venezuela. She's been minister in different positions. She's been a very vocal supporter of President Maduro. That's probably the case that Delcy Rodriguez will actually take over as vice president. But I would imagine that the government of Trump will not be happy with letting the Maduro structure in place in Venezuela. There might be some kind of negotiation for transition.